Clara Hayes pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the boarding house, fingers trembling as she held the letter. The oil lamp on the dresser cast dancing shadows across the cramped room she shared with 3 other women. Outside, Saint Louis thundered with the sounds of progress steamboat whistles, wagon wheels, drunken laughter from the saloons below. But Clara heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to the worn paper in her hands. The letter had arrived 2 weeks ago, forwarded from the matrimonial agency. She'd read it so many times the creases threatened to tear. Miss Hayes. My name is Jonah McCall. I run cattle on 300 acres outside Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. The agency says you seek a new situation. I seek a helpmate. I will be plain with you. I am not a man of pretty words or false promises. The work is hard. The winters are harder. I do not drink spirits. I do not raise my hand in anger. I need someone who can manage a household, mend what's torn, and endure the silence of open country. If you come, you will have your own room until such time as we might speak of other arrangements. I ask for honest work and civil company. Nothing more will be required of you. Should this suit, I will send fare for passage. Should it not, I wish you well in your search. J. McCall. Clara traced her finger over the words, I do not raise my hand in anger. Such a simple promise. Samuel had made grander ones, sworn his love beneath summer stars, spoke of building her a house with real glass windows. Those promises had shattered as easily as the china plate he'd thrown at her head the night she'd finally run. She shifted on the narrow bed, and the springs creaked their familiar complaint. Through the thin walls came the sound of Mary Crawford crying again her husband had found her despite her attempt to disappear into the city's sprawl. The bruises on Mary's arms were turning yellow now, fading like autumn leaves. Clara's own scars were better hidden. She pulled her shawl tighter. Though the room wasn't cold, under the wool, her fingers found the ridge of Ray's skin along her ribs where Samuel's belt buckle had caught her. 6 months since she'd fled Kansas City, and still she woke some nights thinking she heard his boots on the stairs. The boarding house matron, Mrs. Duluth, had been the one to suggest the matrimonial agency. A woman alone in this city, she'd said, shaking her gray head. It's no life, dear, out west. They need wives, good women to civilize the frontier. Civilize? Clara almost laughed, as if she hadn't been broken wild herself. She'd written to 3 men through the agency. The first 2 had sent flowery letters full of grand dreams and passionate declarations. Their words reminded her too much of Samuel's courtship. This Jonah McCall wrote like a man stating terms for buying cattle. Somehow, that honesty felt safer than all the poetry in the world. But safety was an illusion. She knew that now. Clara stood and walked to the small window. Below, a woman in red silk leaned against a lamppost, waiting for evening customers. At least she was honest about what she sold. Clara wondered if accepting Mr. McCall's offer made her any different, trading one form of survival for another. The Wyoming territory. She'd seen it on the map at the library, a vast emptiness marked only by a few towns and military forts. The librarian had shown her an illustration from Harper's Weekly, Endless Grassland beneath an enormous sky. Nothing but savages and cattle out there. The woman had sniffed. Nothing sounded better than something sometimes. Clara returned to the bed and pulled her carpetbag from beneath it. Inside, wrapped in her spare petticoat, lay everything she owned, a sewing kit with good steel needles, 2 worn dresses, a photograph of her parents both dead now. Thank the Lord they never knew what became of their daughter. Her mother's Bible with Clara's real name written inside the cover, and 43 cents. Not enough for passage west, not enough for next month's rent, not enough for anything but slow starvation or quick surrender to the streets. She touched the Bible's leather cover. Her mother had read from it every evening, her voice soft in the lamplight. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. But God had been notably absent the night Samuel came home drunk and accused her of smiling at the dry goods clerk. Absent, too, when she'd lost the baby, Samuel's fists had seen to that. Perhaps God, like everyone else, had headed west. The letter crackled as she unfolded it again. Mr. McCall's handwriting was careful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. A man who took pains with small things might take care with larger ones, or he might simply be better at hiding his cruelties. Through the wall, Mary Crawford's crying had stopped. The silence was worse somehow. Clara had told the agency she was a widow. It seemed simpler than the truth. She'd given them her maiden name and prayed Samuel wouldn't think to look for her there. But men like Samuel had ways of finding what belonged to them. Every knock at the boarding house door, every strange face on the street might be someone he'd sent looking. She dipped the pen in ink and sat at the small table by the window. The paper was cheap, but she'd saved it from her work at the laundry, where she spent 12 hours a day up to her elbows in lye soap and other people's filth. What to write? How to accept a proposal that promised so little and yet more than she'd ever had? Asterisk, Mr. McCall. Asterisk, your letter was received. Your terms are acceptable. I can cook, clean, mend, and keep accounts. I am strong despite my size and accustomed to hard work. I do not require pretty words or false promises. She paused, pen hovering. Should she tell him about Samuel? About the reason she needed distance more than love? No. Let him think her a widow grieving a good man. Everyone preferred pretty lies to ugly truths. Asterisk, I will await your instruction regarding passage. Asterisk, respectfully. Asterisk, asterisk, Miss C. Hayes, asterisk. The ink dried slowly in the humid air. Clara folded the letter and addressed it to the town in Wyoming she couldn't even pronounce. Tomorrow she would use her last stamp to send it. Tomorrow she would set in motion a journey toward a man who might be salvation or damnation. Tonight she would lie awake listening to Mary Crawford's silence and the sounds of the city that had promised refuge but delivered only different dangers. She would hold her mother's Bible and try to remember what faith felt like. She would practice being brave. The oil lamp sputtered, throwing wild shadows on the walls. Clara turned it down to save fuel. In the darkness, she found the letter again, pressing it smooth against her chest. Somewhere past the Mississippi, past the edge of everything she knew, a man named Jonah McCall ran cattle beneath an empty sky. He promised no love, no happiness, no home with glass windows. He promised not to raise his hand in anger. For a woman who'd learned to hope for nothing, it was enough to risk everything. Clara closed her eyes and tried to imagine Wyoming, the silence, the space, the chance to be someone other than a woman running from her past. When sleep finally came, she dreamed of grassland stretching toward mountains she'd never seen, and in the distance, a figure standing still as stone, waiting. The train car swayed like a drunkard, and Clara gripped the wooden bench until her knuckles went white. Around her, 24 women clutched their own carpetbags and valises, each wearing the same expression of desperate hope mixed with terror. Mail-order brides. The conductor had called them with a smirk that made Clara's skin crawl. Cargo. More like human freight heading west. The car had been used for cattle before being hastily converted for passengers. The smell of livestock still clung to the walls, mixing with coal smoke and the scent of too many bodies in too small a space. No proper seats, just rough benches that left splinters in their skirts. No windows that opened, just small gaps near the roof that let in more soot than air. Beside her, a girl who couldn't be more than 17 wept quietly into a handkerchief. I thought it would be different, she whispered to no one in particular. The advertisement said he owned a grand ranch. They all thought it would be different. Clara had learned not to trust advertisements. 3 days out of St. Louis, and already the landscape had changed. The familiar green hills gave way to an endless sea of brown grass that rippled in the wind like water. Towns became fewer, smaller, rougher. At each stop, men gathered on the platforms to stare at the car full of women like buyers at a horse auction. Some of the brides had been claimed at these stops, walking off with strangers who looked nothing like their descriptions. Clara kept her head down and her hand on the small cloth bag that held her traveling money. The fare Mr. McCall had sent, minus what she'd had to spend on food. $20 had seemed like a fortune when it arrived. Now, watching prices rise the further west they went, she realized how carefully she'd need to manage it. "Where you headed?" The woman across from her had steel-gray hair and hands that spoke of a lifetime of labor. "Cheyenne," Clara answered. "That's end of the line for this route. My Mary's in Laramie, answering an advertisement for a shopkeeper." The woman's mouth tightened. "Better than the factories in Boston," she says. "Couldn't be worse than losing fingers to the looms." Clara nodded. They all had their reasons for riding this train. The door between cars banged open, and the conductor appeared, a thin man with tobacco stains on his vest. "North Platte Station in 1 hour. Ladies, those departing, make ready." As he left, Clara noticed him counting heads, making notes in a little book, keeping track of his cargo. She pulled out Mr. McCall's latest letter, sent after he'd received her acceptance. Still brief, still practical. Asterisk Miss Hayes. Asterisk train fare enclosed. Take the Union Pacific to Cheyenne. I will meet you at the station. I stand 6 feet, dark hair, scar through left eyebrow. Will wear a black hat with silver band. Asterisk. The journey is long. Pack light but warm. Wyoming welcomes no one gently. Asterisk J. McCall. Asterisk. Pack light. As if she had any other choice. Everything she owned fit in one bag with room to spare. The train began to slow, and Clara watched another dusty town materialize from the prairie. North Platte larger than the last stops, with actual buildings instead of just tents and shanties. Through the grimy window, she could see the platform already filling with people. "A livestock auction today," someone said. "See the holding pens." But Clara noticed the men weren't looking at the cattle pens. They were watching the train, waiting. 5 women gathered their belongings for North Platte. One was met by a thin man in clerical clothes who looked kind enough. Another by a farmer whose gentle smile eased the fear in her face. But the third was claimed by a man who reeked of whiskey even from 10 feet away. And Clara saw the woman's face crumple as she recognized the trap she'd walked into. "Nothing to be done," the gray-haired woman said quietly. "She's his wife now, or will be soon enough." The train whistles shrieked, and they were moving again. Clara tried not to think about the woman left behind, tried not to see her own possible future in that crumpling face. The landscape grew more desolate, the grass shorter, the earth redder. Mountains appeared on the horizon like a wall at the edge of the world. At each stop, the towns grew rougher, the men harder looking. Clara saw her first Indians at a water stop, Pawnee. Someone said trading with the station master. They looked nothing like the savage pictures in the illustrated papers, just tired people trying to survive. Like everyone else out here. By the 5th day, only 8 women remained in the car. The rest had reached their destinations or given up and gotten off at towns that promised work in saloons or boarding houses. Clara didn't judge them. Desperation made philosophers of them all. The young girl who'd cried those first days had dried her tears and grown harder. "My Herman says he's got a house with 4 rooms, she said, as if trying to convince herself. "Says he's gentle-natured." They all said that in letters. Clara's back ached from the hard benches, and her dress carried 5 days of travel dust. She'd changed once in a station privy that was little more than boards over a hole, struggling with buttons and stays while trying not to think about who might be watching through the cracks. Modesty was another luxury the frontier didn't allow. The conductor appeared again as they approached Laramie. "Next stop, ladies." Then Cheyenne by nightfall. End of the line. End of the line. The words sat heavy in Clara's chest. The gray-haired woman began gathering her things. "You'll be all right," she said to Clara, though her eyes suggested otherwise. "You've got sense. I can see it." Don't let them take that from you. Laramie was a proper town, with a main street and actual hotels. The gray-haired woman's daughter was waiting a thin girl with worried eyes who hugged her mother like she'd never let go. Clara watched them disappear into the crowd and felt her own isolation settle deeper. Only 3 women now for the final stretch to Cheyenne. The young girl clutched a tintype of her intended, staring at it like it might reveal secrets. The other was a widow from Chicago who'd buried 3 children and said she was done with city life and its diseases. Clara had no photograph to study, no image to prepare her, just a description: 6 feet, dark hair, scar through left eyebrow. It wasn't much to build a future on. The sun was setting as Cheyenne appeared, larger than she'd expected. A real town with brick buildings and gas streetlights just being lit. The train began its slow approach, and Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window, she could see the platform. More people than at previous stops, a proper depot with porters and baggage carts. And men, so many men, all waiting, all watching the train arrive. "Courage," the widow said quietly. "Whatever happens, we chose this." Did we? Clara wondered. Or did circumstance choose for us? The train shuddered to a stop with a great hissing of steam. Through the clouded window, Clara scanned the platform. Black hats everywhere, but there, standing apart from the crowd, still as a fence post, a tall figure that might be 6 feet. She couldn't see his face clearly through the dirty glass, just the silver band on his hat catching the last light. The conductor opened their car door. "End of the line. Ladies, Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. May God have mercy on you all." Clara picked up her carpetbag with trembling hands. The young girl went first, almost running into the arms of a boy who looked barely old enough to shave. The widow next, met by a solid-looking man with kind eyes who took her bag without being asked. And then it was Clara's turn. She stepped down onto the platform, legs unsteady after so many days of swaying. The air was different here, thinner, sharper, carrying scents of sage and distance. She stood frozen as the crowd moved around her, searching faces. The tall figure detached from the shadows by the freight office. He moved toward her with the careful gait of a man who'd learned not to spook things. As he drew closer, she saw the scar, a white line through his left eyebrow that pulled his face into a permanent question. Jonah McCall looked exactly like his letter had sounded: plain, direct, carved down to essentials. His face was all angles and weather, his clothes clean but mended. He stopped 3 feet away, giving her space. "Miss Hayes." His voice was low, careful. Clara nodded, not trusting her own voice. He didn't smile, didn't reach for her bag, didn't do any of the things Samuel had done when courting. He simply stood there, letting her look, letting her decide. "I'm McCall," he said finally. "Wagons this way, if you're ready." If you're ready, as if she had a choice, as if she could get back on that train and ride it all the way back to nothing. Clara straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "I'm ready, Mr. McCall." He nodded once and turned toward the street. Clara followed, her carpetbag heavy in her hand, toward whatever waited at the end of this longest journey. Behind them, the train whistle shrieked one last time, lonely as a ghost in the growing dark. The ranch appeared at dusk like a broken promise against the horizon. After 2 hours of jolting wagon ride through grassland that seemed to swallow the world, Clara saw what would be her new home, a log house listing to one side, a barn with daylight showing through its walls, and fence posts that leaned like drunken soldiers. Jonah McCall hadn't spoken 10 words during the journey. He'd helped her into the wagon with careful hands that avoided any unnecessary touch, then climbed up beside her and set the horses to walking. The silence between them was thick as winter wool. Now he pulled the horses to a stop in the yard and sat for a moment, looking at his property as if seeing it through her eyes. "It needs work," he said finally. Clara climbed down before he could help her, her legs stiff from the ride. The ground felt uncertain beneath her feet, or perhaps that was just her world tilting. A cold wind cut through her traveling dress, carrying the scent of cattle and coming snow. "I'll show you inside." Jonah took her carpetbag without asking and led the way to the house. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. Inside. Clara's eyes adjusted to the dimness and took inventory. One main room with a cook stove, rough table, 2 chairs that didn't match. A ladder led to what must be a loft. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a small side room with a narrow bed. "That's yours," Jonah said, following her gaze. "Got a bolt for the inside." A bolt. He'd anticipated her need for a lock between them. Clara's shoulders eased a fraction. He lit an oil lamp, and the yellow light revealed more shelves near empty of goods. A water bucket with a dipper. Clothes pegs on the wall holding 2 shirts and a coat. Everything spoke of a man living at the edge of survival. "Pumps out back for water," he continued. "Privy's past the chicken coop, though there's no chickens yet. Woodpile needs splitting. Roof leaks when it rains hard, but not over your room." He set her bag inside the small bedroom. Clara looked in a rope bed with a straw mattress, a wooden crate for a table, a cracked mirror on the wall. Luxury compared to the boarding house, if she didn't count human company as wealth. "Are you hungry?" Jonah stood awkwardly in the main room, too big for the small space. Clara realized she hadn't eaten since morning, when the last of her traveling food ran out. "I can cook something." Nothing much to cook. He opened a cupboard to reveal meager supplies: flour, salt pork, dried beans, a tin of lard. "Town's a day's ride. I go once a month for provisions." Once a month. The isolation settled on Clara's chest like a stone. She moved to the stove out of habit more than hunger. "I'll make biscuits." Jonah watched her check the firebox, test the damper. "I'll see to the horses," he said, and escaped outside. Alone. Clara explored more freely. The house was clean enough for a man living alone, but neglect showed in corners: dust on the shelves, ashes deep in the stove, windows clouded with grime. The main room held no decorations, no photographs, nothing that spoke of the man who lived here except its very emptiness. She found the flour weevily but usable. No eggs, no milk, but she could make rough biscuits with water and lard. As she worked, her hands remembered their purpose. Cooking was something she could control, unlike everything else in her life. The door opened as she pulled the biscuits from the oven. Jonah brought the cold in with him, and something else: wariness, like a wolf circling a campfire. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the rough table. Jonah ate methodically, without pleasure but without complaint. The lamplight threw shadows that made his face harder to read than it already was. "I rise at dawn," he said finally. "There's coffee if you know how to make it. I'll be working the fence lines tomorrow." Clara nodded. The silence stretched until it hummed. "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I don't expect anything from you, beyond what was in the letter. Cooking, household work, nothing else." The words hung between them like a contract waiting to be signed. "I understand," Clara said quietly. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "I'll bank the stove." "You should. You can retire when you like." Clara cleared the dishes while he dealt with the fire. She could feel him not watching her, deliberately keeping his back turned. When she went to her room, she heard him settling in the loft above, every board creaking under his weight. The bolt on her door was new, recently installed. The metal was still bright, not yet worn smooth by use. Clara slid it home and leaned against the door, breathing hard. Safe. As safe as anywhere could be. She unpacked by lamplight her 2 dresses on wall pegs, her mother's Bible on the crate beside the bed, her few underthings folded in her carpet bag, the photograph of her parents she propped against the mirror, their solemn faces a reminder of better times. The bed was hard but clean. Clara lay fully dressed on top of the covers, listening. The house spoke its own language, whined through the walls, the stove metal cooling with tiny pings. And from above, the sound of Jonah turning restlessly in his own bed. Outside, something howled wolf or coyote. She didn't know the difference. The sound raised goose flesh on her arms. This was true isolation, miles from another human soul except the stranger overhead. She reached under her pillow and found the knife she'd placed there, a kitchen blade she'd taken from the main room. Old habits. In the boarding house, then on the train, and now here. Some part of her would always be ready to fight. The next days fell into a pattern careful as a dance between strangers. Jonah rose before dawn and was gone to his work before Clara emerged. She'd find coffee warming on the stove, sometimes a bucket of fresh water by the door. Small considerations that required no words. She threw herself into the house like it was an enemy to be conquered, scrubbed the floors until her knuckles bled, boiled the curtains until they remembered they'd once been white, organized the pitiful supplies and made lists of what was needed. Jonah appeared for meals and disappeared again. He was putting up winter feed. He said, mending fence before the snow. Their conversations were practical, the state of provisions, the need for wood, the leak in the roof he'd patch come Sunday. On the fourth day, Clara found courage to venture outside while he was gone. The ranch looked worse in full daylight. The chicken coop stood empty, its wire torn and useless. The barn leaned as if the next strong wind would flatten it. Everywhere she looked spoke of a man stretched too thin, trying to hold together what wanted to fall apart. The vastness beyond the ranch buildings made her dizzy. Land rolled out in every direction with nothing to stop the eye until it hit the mountains. No neighbors' smoke, no church spires, no sign that humans had ever touched this place except for the failing ranch. She was hanging wash when the riders appeared on the horizon. 3 men, moving fast. Clara's hand went to her pocket where the kitchen knife waited, but they veered off before reaching the ranch, and she saw Jonah emerge from the barn to watch them go, even from across the yard. She could see the tension in his shoulders. That night at supper, she asked, "Who were the riders?" Jonah's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Newcomb's men. They run cattle on the next range over." "Are they trouble?" He looked at her directly for the first time in days. "Might be, might not. Best you stay close to the house when I'm not here." The warning chilled more than the wind through the walls. Days passed in careful routine. Clara learned the house's moods, the stove's temperament, the exact creak that meant Jonah was descending the ladder. She kept the knife under her pillow but found herself checking it less often. Jonah began lingering after supper instead of immediately retreating. He'd sharpen tools while she mended his shirts, the scrape of steel on whetstone filling the silence. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, not the hot look Samuel used to get, but something more puzzled, as if she were a book in a language he didn't speak. One evening, she found him standing at her bedroom door, examining the bolt. "It's working fine," she said quickly. He nodded, not turning. "It's good steel. Should hold against anything." Against anything. The words were meant as comfort. She realized, in his awkward way, he was trying to tell her she was safe. That night, she made a stew with the last of the salt pork and some wild onions she'd found. Jonah ate 2 bowls without comment, but she'd learned to read his silences. This one said approval. "Winter's coming," he said finally. "Need to get to town before the snow. Make a list of what's needed." Clara had already started one, but she nodded. "How long do the winters last here?" "Too long." He stood, started to turn away, then stopped. "You'll want warmer clothes. I'll trade for some at the mercantile." It was the most he'd said about her comfort since she'd arrived. That night, the wind howled fierce enough to shake the walls. Clara lay listening to the house fight to stand. Above, she heard Jonah's footsteps cross to the ladder. Pause. For a moment, she thought he might come down, might knock on her door to check if she was frightened. But the footsteps returned to his bed, and she was left with just the wind and the knife under her pillow and the bolt on her door that gleamed like a promise in the lamplight. The first gunshot split the night like an axe through pine. Clara jolted awake, her hand already reaching for the knife beneath her pillow. The echo rolled across the empty land, followed by another shot. Then silence, more terrible than the noise. From above came the creak of Jonah's weight hitting the floor. His footsteps moved quick but careful, and she heard him taking down his rifle from the wall pegs. Clara slipped from bed and crept to her door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Stay in your room." His voice came low through the boards. "Bar the door with the dresser if you can move it." Then he was gone, the front door opening and closing so quiet she almost missed it. Clara stood frozen in the dark, heart hammering. The silence stretched until her ears rang with it. She should bar the door like he said, should huddle in her bed and wait. But something in that silence felt wrong, dangerous in a way that made her skin prickle, moving by feel. She pulled on her dress over her nightgown and slipped the knife into her pocket. The main room was tomb dark. Through the window, starlight showed the empty yard. No movement, no sign of Jonah. Clara eased to the window and peered out, trying to see into the shadows by the barn. A shadow detached from the chicken coop, not Jonah, too short, moving wrong. Then another by the well. Her mouth went dry. These men moved like hunters, careful and purposeful. The barn door stood open, a black mouth in the night. Had Jonah gone in there, Clara gripped the knife handle until her fingers ached. 3 strangers on the property. Jonah somewhere in the dark with his rifle, and her trapped in the house like a rabbit in a snare. Footsteps on the porch. Clara backed away from the window, looking for somewhere to hide. The door handle rattled. When it didn't open, a shoulder hit the wood hard enough to shake the frame. "Come on out, woman." The voice was rough, amused. "We know you're in there. Seen the wash on the line." Clara said nothing. The knife felt pitiful in her hand against whatever waited outside. Another slam against the door. The leather hinges groaned. A few more hits like that and they'd give way. "McCall can't help you." A different voice, higher pitched. "Might be he's past helping anybody." Cold flooded Clara's chest. Was Jonah dead shot in the dark before he even knew they were there? The door shuddered again. One hinge tore loose from the frame. Clara moved without thinking, grabbing the iron poker from beside the stove. The knife went into her left hand. If they were coming in, they'd find her ready to fight. She'd learned that much from Samuel: better to fight and lose than cower and hope for mercy that wouldn't come. Glass shattered in her bedroom. They were coming through the windows now, knowing the door was almost gone. Clara backed toward the corner where she could see both entrances, weapons raised. The front door gave way with a crash. A man filled the doorway, just a shape against the stars. He stepped in casual as visiting neighbors. "Well now." She could hear the smile in his voice. McCall found himself a woman after all. Didn't think he had it in him. "Get out!" Clara's voice came steady, which surprised her. He laughed. "That's no way to treat company. Why don't you put them toys down and we can get acquainted proper?" A crash from the bedroom. The second man coming through the window. Clara shifted to keep both doorways in sight. Where was the third? Where was Jonah? "Pretty thing like you, wasted out here." The first man stepped closer. "Could do better than a failed rancher who can't even keep his fences up." "I said get out." "Or what?" He took another step. "You gonna stick me with that poker? I don't think so. You got soft hands, city hands. Not the killing kind." From the bedroom doorway, the second man appeared, younger, with pale eyes that caught the starlight. "She's a fighter. Wade. I like that." Wade. The name lodged in Clara's mind. If she survived this, she'd need names for the law, though law was scarce out here, and justice scarcer. "Where's the third one?" Wade asked his partner. "Checking the barn, making sure McCall's dealt with." Dealt with. Clara's throat closed, but she couldn't think about Jonah now. Couldn't let grief or fear cloud her mind. Survival first, mourning later. Wade stepped closer. She could smell him now, whiskey and horses and old sweat. "Put them down, girl. Don't make this harder than needs be." "I'll kill the first man who touches me." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Maybe the second too before you stop me." Wade paused. Something in her tone. Maybe, or the way she held the weapons like she knew their weight. "You done this before." Clara didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The younger one laughed, but it sounded forced. "She's bluffing. Wade, look at her shake." She was shaking, but not from fear. From rage. From the memory of other hands that wouldn't listen to no. Other nights when she'd had no weapons but her fingernails. A rifle shot exploded outside. All three of them jumped. Through the broken door came the sound of running feet. A man cursing. Another shot. Closer. "That's Newcomb." The younger man moved toward the door. "McCall got him." Wade's attention shifted for just a second, but it was enough. Clara moved, driving the poker toward his middle with all her strength. He twisted, catching it on his ribs instead of his belly, but the blow sent him stumbling. She slashed with the knife, felt it catch cloth and maybe flesh. Wade roared and lunged for her. Clara danced back, swinging the poker in wild arcs to keep him off. The younger man started toward her, then stopped as another rifle shot boomed right outside. "Get out here!" a voice from the yard. The third man panicked. "He's in the shadows! I can't see!" His words cut off in a wet gurgle. Wade backed toward the door, one hand pressed to his side where the knife had found him. "This ain't over," he snarled at Clara. "You or McCall. We'll be back." He grabbed the younger man and shoved him outside. Clara heard horses whinnying, boots running, harsh curses, then hoofbeats pounding away into the night. She stood frozen, weapons still raised. For long minutes after the sound faded, only when her arms began to ache did she lower them, moving carefully to the doorway. "Jonah!" her voice cracked. "Mr. McCall!" A shadow moved by the barn. Jonah emerged into the starlight, rifle in one hand, his other arm hanging wrong. He walked steady but careful, like a man holding himself together by will alone. "You hurt." He stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly. "No." Clara stepped into the yard. "Your arm." "Bullet grazed it. I'll keep." He looked past her at the ruined door. "They get inside?" "Yes, but I fought them off." His gaze sharpened on her face. In the starlight, she saw something shift in his expression. "You fought them?" "With the poker and my knife." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a body by the well. Third one. Didn't give me a choice." Clara looked and saw the dark shape sprawled in the dirt. Her stomach turned, but she'd seen death before. "Who were they?" "The Newcomb's men, like I figured. Been pushing at my boundaries, trying to run me off. Guess they decided to push harder." He swayed again. "Need to see to this arm." Clara moved without thinking, ducking under his good shoulder to support him. He stiffened but didn't pull away. Together they made it inside. By lamplight, she could see the damaged blood soaking his sleeve, the fabric torn where the bullet had passed through. Jonah sat heavy in a chair while she fetched water and her sewing kit. "Gonna need to cut the sleeve," she said. He nodded. Clara worked carefully, peeling away the ruined fabric. The wound was clean but deep, bleeding steady. She'd sewn up worse on herself, hiding in boarding house rooms with no one to help and no money for doctors. Jonah watched her face as she worked. "You've done this before, too." It wasn't a question. Clara kept her eyes on the needle. "Yes." She waited for more questions, but they didn't come. Jonah sat still as stone while she cleaned and stitched and bandaged. Only the tight line of his jaw showed the pain. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently. His hand was warm, calloused, careful. "Thank you." Clara looked at him then, really looked. Blood on his shirt, exhaustion in his eyes. But something else too, a recognition, maybe of what she was, what she'd survived, what they'd both survived tonight. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe, probably." He released her wrist. "But Newcomb's down a man now, and they know you're not helpless." "Not helpless." The words settled into Clara's chest like a gift. They worked together to prop the door back in place, though it wouldn't hold against a determined push. Jonah dragged the dead man to the barn. He'd bury him come daylight. Clara cleaned the blood from her knife and put the poker back by the stove. When everything was done that could be done, they stood awkward in the lamplight. "You should rest," Clara said. "That arm needs healing." "You should bar your door, what's left of it. I'll sleep down here tonight. Keep watch." Clara shook her head. "You're hurt. Take my bed. I'll watch." "No." They looked at each other. Two people who'd learned to be alone, trying to figure out how to be together. "We could take turns," Clara suggested. "I'll wake you in a few hours." Jonah considered, then nodded. He climbed to his loft with effort, and soon she heard the bed ropes creak under his weight. Clara sat at the table with the lamp turned low and the knife within reach. Outside, wind whispered through grass and around corners, but inside, for the first time since arriving, she felt something that might have been safety, not in the walls or the bolt on her door, but in the knowledge that she wasn't facing the dark alone. When Jonah's breathing deepened into sleep overhead, she let herself think about what had happened. She'd fought, she'd drawn blood, she'd stood her ground against men who saw her as prey, and somewhere in the violence and fear, she'd found the woman she used to be before Samuel tried to break her, still there under the scars, still fighting. The wind picked up, rattling the broken door in its frame. Clara checked the knife's edge and settled in to watch the night through. Let them come back, let them try. She was done being afraid. The smell hit them first, smoke carrying on the wind like a promise of destruction. Clara looked up from the wash bucket to see the black column rising from beyond the eastern ridge. Jonah emerged from the barn, his movement still careful with his healing arm. "That's the direction of town," Clara said. "No." Jonah's voice was grim. "Closer. The Hendricks place." They'd been on edge for 2 weeks since the night attack. Jonah had repaired the door and added iron brackets to reinforce it. Clara had taken to wearing her knife always, even while cooking. They'd developed a system of signals where to meet if trouble came, what 3 quick rifle shots meant versus 2. But the trouble hadn't come, until now. "Could be a grass fire," Clara suggested, though she didn't believe it. Jonah was already heading for his rifle. "You remember what we practiced?" "Yes." If he had to ride out, she'd bar the doors, keep the rifle loaded, watch from the loft window, wait for his signal or dawn, whichever came first. But when he emerged from the house, he surprised her. "Come with me." Clara blinked. "To the fire." "To see what's what. Better than sitting here wondering if they're coming next." He was already saddling his horse. "You can ride." Some, she'd learned as a girl, before the world went hard. He saddled the mare, the gentler of his 2 horses. They rode out with rifles across their saddles, Clara trying to remember how to move with the animal instead of fighting it. The smoke grew thicker as they climbed the ridge. The Hendricks place spread below them like a scene from hell. What had been a modest ranch house was now a skeleton of blackened beams. The barn still burned, flames licking at the sky. In the yard, shapes that might have been cattle or might have been worse. "Stay here." Jonah dismounted, handing her his reins. But Clara saw movement near the well and grabbed his good arm. "Wait! Someone's there!" A figure crawled from behind the stone well ring. Even from the distance, Clara could see the dress, the long hair. Jonah was moving before she could speak, leading his horse down the slope. Clara followed, fighting her fear. The smell was worse, close-up smoke and char and something sweet sick underneath. She tried not to look at the shapes in the yard. The woman was Martha Hendricks, her dress torn and face black with soot. She flinched when Jonah knelt beside her, raising her hands to ward off blows. "It's McCall," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Martha's eyes focused slowly. When she saw Clara, she started crying great, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Clara dismounted and went to her, wrapping her arms around the woman's shoulders. "My Ben," Martha gasped. "My boys, they—" "Don't talk now." Clara helped her to her feet. "We need to get you away from here." Martha could barely stand. Between them, Jonah and Clara got her onto Clara's horse. She'd ride with Jonah while Clara took his mount, as they prepared to leave. Clara saw Martha staring back at the burning barn. "Don't look," Clara said. "Just don't look." The ride back was silent, except for Martha's occasional whimpers. At the ranch, Clara took charge, heating water for washing and finding clean clothes that would fit the smaller woman. Martha sat at the table like a broken doll while Clara gently cleaned the soot from her face and hands. "Newcomb's men," Martha whispered finally. "Said the land was wasted on squatters. Said they needed it for grazing." Jonah stood by the window, watching the horizon. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. Wade was leading them." Martha's voice broke. "They made Ben watch while then they shot him. My boys tried to run." Clara's hands stilled on the washcloth. Wade, the same man who'd broken into their house, who she'd cut with her knife. She met Jonah's eyes across the room. "They said every small ranch would burn until folks learned to move on." Martha gripped Clara's hand. "Said McCall was next, soon as they figured how to do it without getting shot." That night, they made Martha a bed in Clara's room while Clara took blankets to the loft. She lay on the floor beside Jonah's bed, both of them awake in the dark. "This won't end," Clara said quietly. "Not until someone stops them." "Or until they burn us out." Jonah's voice was matter-of-fact. "Law's 3 days' ride away. By the time they'd get here, won't be evidence left but ashes." Clara stared at the roof beams. "So we fight." I won't run again." The words came out harder than she intended. "I've done enough running." Jonah was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "What are you running from?" "Clara." His use of her given name in the dark felt more intimate than any touch. Clara closed her eyes. "A man who thought he owned me, who used his fists to prove it." "Your husband." "Never that, though he told everyone I was his wife." She took a breath. "I was young, alone after my parents died. He offered protection, and I was fool enough to take it." The bed ropes creaked as Jonah shifted. "How long?" 2 years, until I couldn't take any more and ran. He's probably still looking." She laughed, bitter. "Might be glad to know I ended up out here. Save him the trouble of killing me himself." "That why you keep the knife handy?" "Old habits." More silence. Then Jonah's hand appeared over the edge of the bed, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Clara looked at it for a long moment before reaching up to grasp it. His fingers closed around hers, careful but solid. "They won't burn us out," he said, "and no one's going to drag you back to anything." They stayed that way, hands linked in the dark, until sleep finally took them. Clara woke to Martha's screams. She scrambled down the ladder to find the woman thrashing in nightmare, calling for her boys. Clara held her until the shaking stopped, then made coffee while dawn crept across the sky. Jonah was already outside, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. The smoke from the Hendricks place had died to a smudge against the morning. "We need supplies," he said when Clara brought him coffee. "Ammunition especially, but I don't want to leave you two alone." "Then we all go," Clara said. "Martha needs the doctor anyway, and to send word to any kin she might have." Jonah looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. They loaded the wagon. Martha huddled between them on the seat like a child. The trip to town took most of the day, every mile feeling like exposure. Cheyenne was buzzing with news of the burning. The sheriff, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, took Martha's statement with obvious reluctance. "The Newcomb says it was lightning strike," he told Jonah. "Says his men were nowhere near the Hendricks place. Lightning doesn't shoot ranchers and chase down their sons." Jonah replied flatly. The sheriff shrugged. "Your word against his, and he's got 6 men say they were playing cards all night at his bunkhouse." Clara felt the old familiar rage building. Justice was for those who could afford it, and people like them never could. They left Martha with the minister's wife, who promised to see her on the next stage to her sister in Colorado. At the Mercantile, Jonah bought ammunition, coffee, and flour. Clara noticed he also bought a second rifle and a box of shells that fit her pistol, the one he'd quietly left on her dresser the week before. The ride back was tense, both of them watching the ridges and draws where ambush might wait. But they made it home as shadows grew long, to find the ranch untouched. That night, Jonah taught her to shoot properly, not the panicked pointing she'd done the night of the attack, but real marksmanship. How to breathe, how to squeeze instead of jerk, how to account for wind. Clara proved a quick study. The rifle felt good in her hands, like control given form. Each shot that hit the target was a small victory against everyone who'd tried to make her helpless. "You're a natural," Jonah said after she put 3 shots through a can at 50 yards. "I'm motivated," Clara corrected. They were walking back to the house when they saw the riders on the southern ridge. 6 men, sitting their horses in perfect silhouette against the dying light, watching, waiting. Jonah pushed Clara behind him, but she stepped out beside him instead, rifle visible in her hands. Let them see. Let them know this wouldn't be like the Hendricks place. The riders sat for long minutes. Then one she thought it might be Wade raised his hand in mock salute. They turned and rode away, but the threat lingered like smoke. That night, Clara didn't even pretend to sleep in the loft. She sat at the table with her rifle while Jonah took first watch at the window. They'd moved past pretense now, past the careful dance of strangers. They were partners in survival, and everything else would have to wait. "They'll come soon," Jonah said. "Tomorrow night, maybe the next. They've made their statement. Now they need us gone." Clara checked her ammunition for the 10th time. "Then we'd better be ready." He turned from the window to look at her. In the lamplight, she saw something in his face she hadn't expected, not fear, not anger, but a kind of fierce protectiveness that made her chest tight. "Whatever happens," he said, "you did good coming here. Want you to know that." Clara met his eyes steady. "Whatever happens, I'm not running. Want you to know that too." Outside, wind rattled the windows like something trying to get in. But inside, 2 people who'd found each other at the edge of nowhere sat vigil together, weapons close and hearts closer, waiting for the fire they knew would come. They came with the new moon, when darkness lay thick as wool over the land. Clara woke to the smell of kerosene and the sound of glass breaking. Fire already licked at the barn walls, casting hell light through the windows. "They're here!" She grabbed her rifle as Jonah dropped from the loft, landing hard but ready. Through the window, flames painted the yard orange. Men moved between the buildings, more than 6, maybe 10. They'd brought friends for this work. "The roof," Jonah said, hearing the telltale whoosh overhead. "They're trying to burn us inside." Clara smelled smoke from above now, heard the crackle of catching wood. The house would be a death trap in minutes. "Back door?" she asked. "They'll be watching it." Jonah checked his rifle, his face grim in the firelight. "But staying means burning." A voice called from outside Wade, his tone mocking. "McCall, send out the woman and you can walk away. We got no quarrel with you. Just her now." Clara's blood went cold. Somehow they'd learned who she was, what she was running from. Maybe Samuel had put out word, offered a reward. Maybe they just wanted to hurt her for fighting back before. "Like hell," Jonah muttered. He called back, "Come and take her." Gunfire erupted, windows shattering. Clara dropped low, glass raining over her. The smoke thickened, burning her throat. Through the broken windows, she saw men taking positions behind water troughs and fence posts. "We go together," Jonah said. "Out the back, head for the creek bed. They can't surround us there." The house. Just walls and wood. You're what matters. Before Clara could respond to that, he was moving. She followed, both of them crouched low. Jonah kicked the back door open and fired into the darkness, drawing return fire. Clara saw muzzle flashes and aimed for them, her rifle bucking against her shoulder. A man cried out, "Hit! Good! One less between them and escape!" They burst from the doorway, running. Clara's dress tangled her legs, but she hiked it high and ran like the devil was behind her, which wasn't far from truth. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt. "There!" A shout. "The woman!" More gunfire. Jonah grunted and stumbled but kept running. They made the slope down to the creek, sliding more than running now. Clara heard pursuit boots and curses and Wade's voice commanding his men to circle around. The creek bed was dry this time of year, offering cover behind its banks. They pressed against the dirt wall, breathing hard. In the light from the burning buildings, Clara saw blood on Jonah's shirt. "You're hit." "Keep moving." He was already reloading, hands steady despite the pain. "Follow the creek north. There's a cave about a mile up where we can make a stand." They moved in a crouch, using every shadow. Behind them, the ranch burned like a beacon. Clara's home for barely a month, and now it was ash. But she was alive. Jonah was alive, and that counted for more than walls. A rider appeared on the bank above, silhouetted against the fire. Clara shot without thinking, one smooth motion like Jonah had taught her. The man toppled from his horse. "That's two," Jonah said with grim approval. They kept moving, but the sounds of pursuit grew closer. These men knew the land too, knew where the creek led. Clara's dress caught on roots and rocks, slowing her down. Her breath came in gasps that hurt her smoke-seared throat. The cave appeared as a darker shadow in the dark bank. Not much, just an overhang where water had carved out the earth, but defensive. They scrambled up into it as the first pursuers rounded the bend. Gunfire exploded again. Clara and Jonah fired down at the men caught in the open creek bed. Men scattered, diving for whatever cover they could find. But the cave gave the high ground, and moonless dark was their friend now. "How much ammunition?" Jonah asked. Clara checked. "Maybe 20 rounds. "Make them count." A standoff developed. The men below fired sporadically, trying to keep them pinned. Clara could hear Wade organizing them, sending some to flank. But the creek banks were steep here, the approach to the cave narrow. Anyone trying to rush them would pay. "Clara," Hayes, Wade's voice echoed off the banks. "That's your name. Isn't it got a wire from Kansas City? Man there offering good money for your return. Says you're his property. Stole from him when you ran." Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. Samuel. He'd found her after all. "Says he wants you back alive if possible." Wade continued. "But dead works too if necessary. Either way, he wants proof you're done running." "You believe every wire you get," Clara called back, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Man who'd pay for a woman's death isn't worth trusting. You think he'll actually pay once I'm dead?" Silence. She'd hit a nerve their honor among thieves was thin. Jonah touched her shoulder. "Good thinking," he whispered. "Make them doubt." "Besides," Clara added, louder, "you already lost 2 men, maybe 3. How many more is blood money worth?" "Shut up," Wade's control slipped. "Boys, rush them." Men charged up the creek bed. Clara and Jonah fired methodically, picking targets. Men fell, others retreated, but some made it closer, finding cover behind rocks below the cave. The distance was shortening. Jonah's rifle clicked empty. As he reloaded, a man appeared at the cave mouth, pistol raised. Clara turned, but too slow. Jonah moved faster than she'd have thought possible for a wounded man. He dropped the rifle and drew his pistol in one motion, firing point blank. The attacker fell backward, but his dying shot caught Jonah in the chest. "No!" Clara caught him as he fell, her hands immediately slick with blood, too much blood. Jonah's breathing came wet and hard. "Keep fighting!" he gasped. "Don't let them!" Another man at the cave mouth. Clara snatched Jonah's pistol and fired. Fired again until the shape fell away. Rage burned through her clean and pure as flame. They'd taken her home, shot her man, tried to drag her back to hell. No more running, no more fear. She laid Jonah against the cave wall and took position at the entrance. Her rifle barked death at anything that moved. When it ran dry, she used the pistols. When those emptied, she grabbed the dead man's weapon. "She's gone mad," someone shouted. "Fall back!" But Clara wasn't mad. She was done. Done being prey. Done being property. Done watching good people die for standing with her. "Wade." She had one bullet left. "You want me? Come get me yourself. Or are you only brave when you've got 10 men and fire to do your killing?" Silence stretched. Then Wade appeared in the creek bed, walking slow, his own pistol drawn. "Your man's dead or dying. You're out of ammunition. Surrender now and I might let you live long enough to see Kansas City again." Clara stood at the cave mouth, pistol steady. One bullet. She could end Wade, but his men would rush her after. Or, she thought of Samuel, waiting for news of her death, of all the women like her, running from men who thought they owned them, of Jonah bleeding out behind her because he'd stood up when others wouldn't. "You're right," she said. "I've got one shot left." Wade smirked, thinking he'd won. Clara raised the pistol to her own temple. "And I'll use it before I let you take me alive." Wade's smirk vanished. His payment depended on proof of death, but a woman who killed herself in a cave would be hard to retrieve, harder to prove. His men wouldn't rush a cave where she might kill herself and leave them with nothing but their dead and no pay. "Now wait." "Back off!" Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "All of you mount up and ride away. Now, or I swear to God I'll pull this trigger and you can explain to Samuel Kane why you've got no body to show him." She'd used the name Samuel's name, showed she knew exactly who was hunting her and why. Wade hesitated, calculating odds and profits. "Boys won't like riding away empty-handed." He said, "Your boys are already bleeding in the dirt. How many more want to die for maybe money?" Clara pressed the pistol harder against her head. "I'm counting to 5. 1. "You're bluffing." 2. Wade shifted, uncertain now. Behind Clara. Jonah made a sound still alive, still breathing. 3. "All right." Wade raised his hand. "All right. We're going." 4. "We're going." He backed away, calling to his men. "Mount up, we're done here." Clara kept the pistol pressed to her temple as she listened to them retreat, boots on stone. Horses being gathered, wounded men being helped into saddles. She stayed frozen until the hoofbeats faded into distance. Only then did she lower the empty pistol. She'd fired her last shot at the man in the cave mouth. The bluff had been all she had left. Clara dropped to her knees beside Jonah. His eyes were open, watching her with something like awe. "Empty gun," he whispered. "Empty gun." She pressed her hands against his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "Don't you die on me, Jonah McCall! Don't you dare!" "Quite a woman," he breathed. "Quite a woman." In the distance, she could see the ranch still burning, but dawn was coming, painting the sky gray. They were alive. Wade was gone. And sometimes that was victory enough. Clara tore strips from her dress to bind Jonah's wounds. They had to move, had to find help. She wouldn't let him die, not after he'd stood by her when no one else would. "Can you ride?" she asked. "With help." Together, they struggled from the cave. The bodies in the creek told the story of the night's violence. Clara found a horse wandering loose, its rider among the dead. She got Jonah into the saddle and climbed up behind him, holding him steady. As they rode toward town and what help it might offer, Clara looked back once at the smoke rising from what had been their home. Let it burn. They'd build another, stronger this time. She'd found her place to stand and fight. More than that, she'd found someone to stand with her. That was worth any price. The doctor's house sat at the edge of Cheyenne, paint peeling and windows dusty. Clara pounded on the door until her fists ached. Jonah slumped against her, his blood soaking through her torn dress. "Dr. Morrison, please." The door opened to reveal a thin man in a nightshirt, spectacles crooked on his nose. His eyes widened at the sight of them. "Get him inside," he said, all business now. On the table. Clara helped maneuver Jonah onto the kitchen table. In the lamplight, his face was gray as ash, his breathing shallow. The doctor cut away his shirt, revealing 2 wounds, one through the shoulder, one in the chest that bubbled with each breath. "Lungs punctured," Morrison muttered, already reaching for instruments. "You family." "I'm his wife," Clara lied without hesitation. The doctor glanced at her blood-soaked dress, the rifle still clutched in her hand. "Set that down and wash your hands. I'll need help." What followed was the longest hour of Clara's life. She held Jonah down as the doctor worked, extracting one bullet, patching what could be patched. Jonah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes gripping her hand hard enough to bruise. "Don't leave," he mumbled once, eyes unfocused. "Please don't leave." "Never," Clara whispered back. When it was done, Morrison straightened with a sigh. "He might live, might not. Next day will tell. He needs rest, quiet, and prayer if you're inclined." "How much do we owe?" The doctor looked at her again. Really looked. "You're the woman from the McCall place. Heard about the trouble with Newcomb's men." Clara tensed, hand moving instinctively toward where her knife should be. "Relax," Morrison said. "I have no love for Newcomb. Man thinks he owns the whole territory." He washed his hands in a basin. "No charge, but you can't stay here. Too visible. There's a widow on 3rd Street. Mrs. Gunderson. She takes in boarders and knows how to keep quiet." Clara didn't trust easily, but she had no choice. They moved Jonah to Mrs. Gunderson's boarding house as dawn broke properly. The widow, a sturdy German woman with kind eyes, asked no questions, just helped Clara get Jonah into a clean bed. For 3 days, Clara didn't leave his side. She spooned water between his cracked lips, changed his bandages, talked to him when fever took hold and he thrashed against invisible enemies. Mrs. Gunderson brought food and news from town. "Sheriff's asking about the bodies found out by the creek," she reported. "Newcomb claims they were rustlers. Nothing to do with him." "Of course he does," Clara said bitterly. "But folks are talking. The Hendricks burning. Now your place. People are getting scared. Some are saying it's time for vigilance committees like they used to have." On the 3rd night, Jonah's fever broke. Clara woke from dozing in the chair to find him watching her with clear eyes. "You stayed," he said, voice rough as sandpaper. "Said I would?" He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "The ranch." "Gone. No point sugaring it. But we're alive." "Wade." "Gone too, for now." Jonah was quiet, processing. Then, "You held an empty gun to your head." "It worked." "Could have gone wrong. He could have called your bluff." Clara shrugged. "Everything could go wrong. Usually does, but sometimes you get lucky." He caught her hand. "Wasn't luck, was courage." They looked at each other in the dim lamplight. So much unspoken between them, the growing connection neither had expected. The partnership forged in violence, the future uncertain as smoke. "Clara," Jonah began, then stopped, started again. "When I'm healed, we'll rebuild, together, if you're willing." "I'm willing." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "As partners or—" Clara leaned forward, decision made. The kiss was careful, mindful of his injuries, but it sealed something between them. Not passionate like Samuel's early promises, but solid, real, built on respect and shared survival. When they parted, Jonah was almost smiling. Been wanting to do that since you held off those men with a poker. Took you long enough, Clara said, but she was smiling too. Recovery was slow. Clara took work at the boarding house to pay their keep, cooking and cleaning for Mrs. Gunderson's other boarders. She wore her pistol openly now, and men stepped aside on the street. Word had spread about the woman who'd shot it out with Newcomb's gang. Jonah grew stronger daily, frustration clear in his face at being bedridden. Clara brought him newspapers, books from the small lending library, anything to occupy his mind. "We need to think about what comes next," he said one evening. "Can't stay here forever." "The land's still yours," Clara pointed out. "We could rebuild." "With what money and Newcomb still out there, Wade too." Clara had been thinking about this. Mrs. Gunderson says there's a new territorial judge coming, one who can't be bought. Maybe things will change. Maybe. Jonah didn't sound convinced. Or maybe we head somewhere else. California, Oregon, somewhere fresh. Running. Clara kept her tone neutral. Strategic retreat. She set down her sewing. "I meant what I said. I'm done running. That's our land. They burned us out once. But we can build again. Build better. And when they come again, then we fight again." Clara met his eyes. "But this time, we won't be alone. Mrs. Gunderson says folks are tired of Newcomb. The other small ranchers are talking about standing together." Jonah was quiet, thinking. Then, "You'd make a good general." "I'd make a better rancher's wife, if anyone was asking." The words hung between them. Jonah struggled to sit up, reaching for her hand. "Clara Hayes, will you?" The door burst open. Clara was on her feet, pistol drawn, before she recognized the intruder. Mrs. Gunderson. Face flushed with urgency. "There's men coming," she gasped. "5 riders. Someone must have talked." Clara was already moving, helping Jonah to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright, reaching for his own weapon. Backstairs. Mrs. Gunderson said, "My cousin has a wagon in the alley. He'll take you to the church. Sanctuary still means something here." They made it to the alley as hoofbeats echoed from the street. Jonah couldn't run, could barely walk, but Clara supported him to the wagon. The driver, a young man with Mrs. Gunderson's same determined jaw, whipped the horses to motion. Behind them, shouts erupted from the boarding house. Clara looked back to see men spilling onto the street, Wade's voice carrying over the rest. They'd been found. The church appeared ahead, its steeple a finger pointing at salvation. The pastor, a man who'd buried the Hendricks family, met them at the door. "Inside, quickly!" The sanctuary was dim, smelling of wood polish and old prayers. Clara helped Jonah to a pew as the pastor barred the doors. "They won't violate sanctuary," he said. "Not even Newcomb's men. Too many God-fearing folks in town would turn against them." As if to test that, hoofbeats circled the church. Wade's voice called out, "Send them out! Reverend, this is legal business." "Show me your warrant," the pastor called back. "Show me your badge." Silence. Then the sound of horses moving off. But Clara knew they wouldn't go far. "Now what?" she asked. The pastor smiled grimly. "Now we wait for morning, and we see if this town has any courage left." Clara sat beside Jonah in the pew, their hands linked, outside. She could hear men taking positions, settling in for a siege. But inside, in this quiet space that promised safety, she felt something she hadn't in months. Hope. "You never finished your question," she said quietly to Jonah. He squeezed her hand. "Will you marry me, Clara, here and now, before whatever comes next?" Clara looked at this man who'd stood by her, bled for her, offered her partnership in the truest sense. Not ownership, not protection in exchange for servitude, but a genuine joining of equals. "Yes," she said simply. The pastor overheard and came forward. "I can perform the ceremony now if you wish. Seems fitting, given the circumstances." And so in a besieged church, with outlaws waiting outside and their future uncertain as dawn, Clara Hayes and Jonah McCall spoke words that bound them together. No flowers, no fancy dress, no guests but God and a pastor who believed in doing right. When the pastor pronounced them married, Jonah kissed Clara with a fervor that belied his injuries. For a moment, the world beyond the church walls ceased to exist. But only for a moment. "They're still out there," the pastor said unnecessarily. "But word's spreading. People are gathering. This might be the spark that finally stands up to Newcomb." Clara helped Jonah lie down on a pew, his strength failing. She checked her pistol, counted her ammunition. Whatever came with sunrise. She'd meet it as Clara McCall now. The name felt like armor. Outside, she could hear voices multiplying. Not just Wade's men now, but townspeople, arguments, sides being chosen. "Tomorrow changes everything," Jonah murmured, already half asleep from exhaustion and blood loss. Clara kept watch in the darkness, hand on her weapon, wedding ring improvised from a piece of wire the pastor had found. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. But tonight, she was no longer alone, no longer running. She was Clara McCall, and she would defend what was hers. "Let them come." Dawn came slow to Cheyenne, painting the sky the color of old blood. Clara hadn't slept, keeping watch while Jonah recovered his strength on the hard church pew. Through the windows, she could see the crowd that had gathered townspeople drawn by word of the standoff, faces she recognized from the mercantile and boarding house. "Must be 50 people out there," the pastor said, peering through a crack in the door. "Haven't seen the town this stirred up since the railroad came through." A new voice cut through the morning air, authoritative and clear. "This is Federal Marshal Thomas Brennan. I'll have order here. Gentlemen, everyone stand down." Clara felt Jonah stir beside her. "Marshal," he murmured. The new judge must have sent him. The pastor said, "Thank the Lord." Through the window, Clara watched a man in a black coat dismount from his horse. He wore a star on his vest and moved with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Wade and his remaining men clustered near the church steps, suddenly looking less sure of themselves. "Open the doors. Reverend," Marshal Brennan called. "I need to sort this out proper." The pastor looked to Clara, who nodded. She helped Jonah sit up, keeping her hand near her pistol. The doors swung open to reveal the marshal, a weathered man with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. "Mrs. McCall, I presume?" He tipped his hat to Clara. "And this would be your husband. Heard you two had some trouble with night riders." "That's one way to put it," Clara said. Wade pushed forward. "Marshal, these two are wanted. The woman especially. There's a warrant from Kansas." "I've seen the so-called warrant." Brennan interrupted. "Interesting thing about telegraphs, they work both ways. Did some checking on this Samuel Kane who claims Mrs. McCall here is his runaway wife." Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her face still. "Turns out," the marshal continued, "there's no record of any marriage. What there is record of is Mr. Kane being wanted in Missouri for assault and attempted murder of a woman named Sarah Morrison. Seems he has a habit of claiming women are his property when they're not." Wade's face darkened. "That's got nothing to do with It's got everything to do with it." Brennan's voice hardened. "You burned out the Hendricks family. You attacked the McCall ranch. You pursued these folks with intent to kidnap or kill, all for money promised by a wanted man." "You can't prove we burned anything," Wade snarled. "Actually, I can—" A new voice from the crowd. Clara recognized him, Robert Hendricks, Martha's brother-in-law, who'd been traveling when his family was killed. He pushed through the crowd, face grim. I found this in the ashes of my brother's barn. He held up a pistol, the ivory handle cracked but visible. Recognize this, Wade. That fancy gun you're so proud of must have dropped it in your hurry to murder children. Wade's hand went to his holster. Found it empty. His men shifted nervously. That proves nothing, Wade said, but his voice had lost its certainty. It proves enough for me. Marshal Brennan drew his own weapon. Casual but ready. Wade Coulter, you're under arrest for murder and arson. Your men too if they don't disperse right quick. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then one of Wade's men turned his horse and rode off. Another followed. Soon only Wade remained, isolated on the church steps. This isn't over, he said, looking at Clara with pure hatred. Yes, it is. Clara stood, supporting Jonah as he rose beside her. It's over because I say it's over. I'm not running anymore. Not from you. Not from Samuel Kane. Not from anyone. Marshal Brennan's deputies, men from town, who'd pinned on temporary badges, moved in to take Wade. He went without fighting, perhaps seeing the fury in the crowd's faces. The Hendricks family had been well liked. The town's patience with Newcomb's reign of terror had finally snapped. What about Newcomb himself? Jonah asked, leaning heavily on Clara. Being questioned as we speak. Brennan said, man's claiming innocence, of course. Says Wade acted without his knowledge, but his story's falling apart quick. Too many people ready to talk now that they're not afraid. Clara felt something ease in her chest. Justice. Actual justice. Not the frontier kind bought with bullets, but the real thing. You two need medical attention, the marshal continued. And then we'll need statements. But after that, he smiled. I hear you've got a ranch to rebuild. The crowd parted as Clara and Jonah made their way out. Mrs. Gunderson was there, beaming through tears. Robert Hendricks nodded grimly. Even the taciturn mercantile owner tipped his hat. These people had found their courage, and Clara realized with surprise that she and Jonah had somehow helped kindle it. Dr. Morrison was waiting with his bag. As he checked Jonah's wounds, proclaimed them healing well despite the night's exertions. Clara stood in the morning sun and breathed free air. We'll need supplies. Jonah said, tools, lumber. Starting over won't be easy. The Hendricks lumber was going to build their new barn, Robert said quietly. It's yours if you want it. They'd appreciate knowing it went to good use. Others stepped forward. Offers of labor, of livestock, of whatever was needed. The same community that had seemed indifferent to their plight had transformed into something else neighbors. Kinoa ones. Asterisk, asterisk. 6 months later, asterisk, asterisk. Clara stood in the doorway of their new house, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs now. The house was smaller than before, but better built, with help from half the town. The barn stood straight and strong, the fences repaired and extended. Jonah came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. His wounds had healed, leaving new scars to join the old ones. They matched hers now, visible evidence of survival. Regrets? He asked. Clara leaned back against him. None. Not even about the excitement. Life's been mighty quiet since Wade went to prison and Newcomb fled the territory. Quiet's good. I've had enough excitement for a lifetime. He turned her in his arms, and she saw that look in his eyes, the one that still made her breath catch. Mrs. McCall, have I mentioned lately that you're the bravest woman I know? Mr. McCall, you might have mentioned it once or twice. They stood together as darkness settled over their land. Inside, supper waited on the new table. Tomorrow would bring its own work, always work on a ranch. But tonight was theirs. Clara thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the train in Cheyenne all those months ago. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder but also softer. Someone who'd learned the difference between being owned and being loved. Jonah, she said. I'm pregnant. His arms tightened around her. She felt him smile against her hair. "Well now, guess we'd better add on another room." Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the empty grassland. Once, she'd run here to hide. Now she stayed because she chose to. This land, this man, this life, all chosen freely. That was the only freedom that mattered. Chinsum. Asterisk, asterisk. 20 years later, asterisk, asterisk. Ma, tell me again why you stayed. Clara looked up from her mending at her son, tall like his father. But with her steady gaze, young Tom was 17 now, old enough to wonder about the world beyond their ranch. "Because I chose to," she said simply. "Your father never demanded I stay, never claimed to own me. He just stood beside me when trouble came. That made all the difference. But you could have gone anywhere, done anything." Clara smiled. "I did do something. I helped build this ranch, raised you and your sisters, helped this town find its backbone, lived free on my own terms." Tom considered this, then nodded and went back to his chores. He was a good boy, would be a good man, like his father. Jonah came in as the sun set, moving slower now, but still strong. He kissed Clara's cheek as he had every evening for 20 years. "How's our boy?" he asked, asking questions about choices and freedom. "What did you tell him?" Clara set aside her mending and took her husband's weathered hand. "The truth. That freedom isn't about running. It's about choosing where to stand and who to stand with." They sat together on the porch they'd built with their own hands, on land they'd defended with blood and courage, in a life they'd chosen together. In the distance, their daughters helped with the evening chores, their laughter carrying on the wind. Clara had been a mail-order bride, too scared to hope for happiness. She'd found something better than happiness. She'd found herself, and a partner who saw her strength when the rest of the world saw only property to be claimed. The Wyoming sky spread endless above them, full of stars and possibilities. Clara leaned against Jonah's shoulder and watched night settle over their land. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. But tonight, she was home, by choice, and that made all the difference. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Clara and Jonah's journey. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of courage, love, and survival from the American frontier.